Since we have not yet elected officers for the year 2020, I will call the meeting to order and introduce everyone.
Kyle Dersch, citizen at large.
Jake Lake, Vice Chair.
Jeff Wilson.
Dennis Jenkins, Planning Commission Rep.
Rick Steiner, Township Board.
Phil Goldsmith, Township Attorney.
Karen Kincaid, Planning and Zoning. Would you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Do the roll call. Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Here.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Jenkins?
Here.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
All present. Approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
And now we will elect the Board of Zoning Appeals officers. We will be,
We had a motion and a second.
Motion and second. Nita.
oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jenkins?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
I'm not used to doing both sides here.
We got you covered, Karen.
Thank you. Okay, now we will do the election of officers. We will be electing a vice chair and a chair. Do I hear a nomination? Well, for chair, let's do chair first.
Chair. I'd like to nominate Jake Lake for chair.
I'll second that.
I'll accept. Any other nominations? Need a roll call.
Yeah. Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Aye.
Motion carried. Jake, if you take the gavel, you will now.
Oh, boy, I get to leave now. Okay, thanks. Do you want me to do the next part then, Karen? or-
Please,
Okay.
please.
All right, we'll look for a nomination for Vice Chair.
I make motion for Vice Chair Jake Lake. Or, let's see, boy, good. Kyle Dersch. You can't do both.
Sure you can.
I'll support. Any other nominations? Hearing none, roll call vote.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Aye.
Mr. Jenkins?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Now that we have the new officers for the Board of Appeals, Zoning Appeals, we're going to move on to approval of the minutes of our December 2nd meeting. For anyone that was at that meeting, I'd like to recommend we approve the minutes.
I make motion to approve the minutes of the December 2nd, 2019 meeting as presented.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to new business, looking for a motion to open a public hearing regarding the appeal of Michael and Angela Malak, requesting a plus or minus 5-foot height variance.
I'll make a motion to open up a public hearing for the appeal of Michael Angela Malak at 10232 Lewis Avenue, Temperance, Michigan, 48182.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Karen, if you've got information to share?
I do. Again, the applicants are Michael and Angela Malak of 10232 Lewis Avenue, same as the location of the variance request. Acreage at 35.72 acres, R2B, single-family residentially zoned. The applicant is seeking to construct a 60-foot by 80-foot, a 4,800 square foot, 25 feet in height pole barn, per section 400, 1903, accessory buildings. A parcel having more than 5 acres is permitted an unlimited amount of square footage and 20 feet in height. The applicant has indicated in the submitted letter the accessory structure is for their own personal use for storage, campers, tractors, lawn equipment, etc. The applicant states the restriction by ordinance of 20 feet creates a hardship to store their larger equipment through the barn entrance and with their intent to store feed, hay, and grain in a loft area. At this time, there have been no letters or calls of objection to the request. However, the applicant has supplied 4 letters of no objection, and the map was included in your packet for reference.
Thank you, Karen. I see the applicants are here. Is somebody from either party would like to come to the podium? Please state name and address, and if you want to add on to what Karen had already stated.
Okay, sure. I'm Angie Malak. I'm listed as Angela Malak. Address is 10232 Lewis Avenue, Temperance, Michigan. I think you've summarized it really well. The intent is to have storage, loft storage for grain and hay. There were items that we plan to store. One of them is a backhoe that will just fit in the 14-foot door entrance. So when you add in an overhead door device that pulls that in, opens the overhead door, that's 15 feet right there, which will equate to 20 feet. So we're looking for a 5-feet variance in order to have the overhead loft storage for the grain and hay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for the applicant?
Since we're in the public hearing, any comment from the public?
Oh, good call. If there are any other comments from the public, if you would please go ahead and stand at the podium and state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Laura Hall, and I'm representing me and my husband Carson Hall, and we're at 644 Pickard Road. Sure. Okay, I'm not here to object against the variance in height. The problem being is that our property is south of theirs, just in back of the lowest point in their property. My problem being is that they dug a pond there. There's a huge excavation hill. And with this new structure, it's going to divert more water to the lowest point. And unfortunately, our property abuts that lowest point. So basically, we drain all the water that collects back there. And there's a small drainage ditch that runs the length of our property to Pickard, which Mrs. Pickard dug in the 1800s. But what I want to know is what's going to be done to, I don't want to exasperate the flooding problem. My husband's out there with hoses and fire hoses and pumps a lot. I have pictures if you would care to look at them. But with that, it's going to disperse more water, and it's going to run right to the lowest part on the property, which is going to exacerbate our flooding problem. So do I have anybody that might be able to tell me how we address the drainage issue of building another structure that's going to divert more water than's already there? Does that make sense? Could it be possible that the dirt, if they build a leeway to get to this new building, they're going to build that up, because I've seen tractors and that's never been graded since 1984 was the last year that field was planted. And somebody in my family's owned that property for 67 years, and we have had a major source of flooding from draining all of that property in back of us. So my concern is that that is going to create more of a problem for us. So where do we go with that? And who would I address? Would it be possible to grade that?
I'll take a quick note, and I will defer then to our legal counsel because he's so good at it. Number one, it's not legal for someone else to divert any water runoff from their property onto someone else's property.
But it's been that way for 60-some years, yeah.
I get that. So we can't look at conditions that have taken place previously.
Correct.
But if they were doing something on the property today that's going to increase that over and above, then legally they cannot do that. So there are issues and avenues that will go through the Drain Commission that have to take a look into it as well.
Yeah, we've had personal contact with every drain commissioner since Richard Burton.
And they basically have said,
Well, they gave my husband kudos on being a Corps of Engineer that's keeping that drain. he actually put a drainage tile. We've done all we could possibly do. We've got drainage tiles in our middle of our yard to alleviate it. He's got something in the back. What happens in the fall, all the leaves fall, and it blocks that totally. And then it all comes forward at once. It's a torrential flood then. And like I said, we try to take that out as we can to the best of our ability. But like I'm saying, a building this size sheds a lot of water. That's a big building they're going to build. I don't care that they build a building or what they put in it. I'm only concerned about where the drainage is going to go because we happen to abut the lowest part of their property. And with that runoff, it's never been graded, it's never been leveled. We're going to be inundated even more so. A large building deflects a lot of extra water, as does, they have a huge excavation there, and there's a mountain of dirt. I don't know if they have good intent with it, but we just like some little bit of grading back there so we're not, you don't understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
well-
Like, here's a structure on one end, and then they have a pond up in the front, but unfortunately, that doesn't drain their field.
Right. Well, I can tell you this, that if this variance request was to go forward for approval, we are allowed as a board to put reasonable conditions on that approval. And again, Mr. Goldsmith, he'd be the first one to tell you exactly what I just said. Reasonable conditions can be put on a property owner if we were to pass a variance.
Right, because all water seeks its lowest point, and with another building to shed more water, it's less acreage that has drainage because there's a building on it. Therefore, it's going to probably exacerbate our flooding problem. So, I don't know what measures people take to see that it's drained properly and doesn't add to our flooding woes, you know?
Well, reasonable conditions would be, possibly grading, or
Yeah.
sometimes you can build a berming area where it
That
could
would be a
still,
godsend.
which it would still drain off to, as you said, there's a drain out
Right.
behind, so.
Yeah,
those are the
Mrs.
kind of
Picker
things-
dug that little ditch. It's in my deed. It was in, the name of our road's Pickard Road. It was in the early 1900s, but she was draining her own property because she owned all of it. You know what I mean? And years later, we're still here. And that's my only concern, is to see if we could somehow address the drainage issue.
Okay.
And that's why I got to saying, how do we follow up on that?
I'll defer to my fellow board members and legal counsel if he wants to add anything.
I think at this point, Mr. Steiner's taken some notes, and, if this is something that's agreed upon as a reasonable request, we'll put something in the notes of the approval. To that point, Mr. Steiner made a good, valid point, and Phil, back me up if I'm stating this incorrectly, but I believe a building cannot be built on a piece of property that drains onto another piece of property. I don't know that a building permit would allow for that.
Yeah, their building that they're planning on, from what I could see, is not directly in back of our property. It's maybe 2 doors down from where we live. But like I said, it's going to shed a lot of water, and all of that, it needs graded in back of that area. And they're probably going to have to build up some type of access to that building that runs the whole length of Pickard Road. But once they build that up, if they don't grade it all behind the properties, it will end up being a worsened condition for us. So we follow up in what sense?
Well, we are going to make a determination tonight on whether or not we approve it, and what will be in the approval is what we'll have tonight if there is an approval that is made. So I would say stay by and hear what the comments.
All righty. Well, thank you for your time.
Go ahead.
We've had the most rain in the past 100 years, so we can totally appreciate what she's referring to. When the pond was dug, there was a drain tile that is just to give context, and I think maybe it would help as well, give you peace of mind. There's a drain tile placed all the way around the pond, and then a drainage pipe run from an overflow pipe to so if the pond were to overflow, it will drain out into an area in the ditch, so, and then go into, off the property into the ditch. That was approved, the prints were approved by the township before we dug, and we had an engineer draw it up. So if this were to be approved tonight, we could potentially tie our, what do you call it, eaves and downspouts into that drainage tile to ensure that the water from the building, I'm not sure where your property is located, if you're on the southwest or southeast side or southwest side.
Walk directly back where you're going to build your new building. We're south of that, and it's at the lowest part in your field. And I'm sure you're aware of where the lowest part in your field is, because all your four wheels got stuck there before.
We're going to build to the north of the house. So if you're looking at the house off of Lewis Avenue, it's to the north. It's not in the back of the property. It's to the north of the property. So just in front of the pond, not behind the pond, not in the back corner. It's,
That's not what it showed in the, yeah, when I looked at the property
okay.
thing.
Oh, no, it's not. It is in front. You can access it from our driveway.
That was misleading.
Oh, okay, so you thought it was in the back corner.
Yeah, when we showed the picture of it, it showed.
Hey, guys, yeah, so I tell you what, we do have a meeting to proceed here. This is good conversation, and I think it's appropriate for neighbors to have some of this conversation. But perhaps we'll move forward, and if you guys want to talk a little bit more after the meeting, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Absolutely, yeah, just wanted to give you context about the drainage, that's all.
Okay. I make
So,
a motion.
Mr. Chairman, if I understand this correctly, first of all, a property owner cannot interfere with the natural flow of water, cannot build a structure, cannot do something that would interfere with the natural flow of water and displace it off of the property owner's property onto an adjoining property owner. So we have a couple of issues here. If this flooding condition, and I'm sure it has, let's just say, this flooding condition has existed for 60 years, it almost sounds like the natural flow of the water is from we'll use Lewis Avenue as a reference point, so from west to east and maybe a southeasterly direction. So that doesn't provide any comfort for these folks because they don't want that problem to be aggravated beyond what it already is. So we all know if you put a large barn on a piece of property, that area upon which the barn is constructed is no longer available to absorb water. So it's going to be displaced by the roof. But it sounds like if the elevation drops as we go from west to east, it almost sounds like where the barn is going to be constructed, they could tie in, as they said, their downspouts and have it go via underground tile to their pond or to where the outlet of the pond is, which would hopefully avoid creating additional water on the neighbor's property. That's what it sounds like to me. And if that was done that way, and with the elevations and the routing of the water that would come off the roof and maybe off any concrete that might be around the barn area, that would address that problem. So the other issue is, and I don't think the drain that was being discussed is a county drain. I could be wrong. It probably goes to a county drain at some point in time. Okay, so if that could be kept open to flow and make its way to Little Lake Drain and not pond on any of the neighbors' property, that would be wonderful. The Drain Commission isn't going to come in on, they have jurisdiction over Little Lake Drain. That's a county drain. They don't have jurisdiction over what Mrs. Pickard years ago dug, but if that can be kept open through private easements or whatever to Little Lake Drain, that would help alleviate the problem. But the cast off of the water from the roof of this structure, if it's diverted into downspouts and diverted into the pond, and there's an outlet provided for by the engineered drawings, should hopefully take care of the problem. I think that probably is good news to the neighbors because it's not to the back where there's a decrease in elevation. It's to the, what I'll call the front, farther to the west to Lewis Avenue. So the drainage tile to the pond probably would prevent any additional water runoff going to the neighbors.
That sounds about right. Excuse me. So I think with that said, if we've going to put that to bed, I think what we'll do is let's move on. I'll look for a recommendation to close the public hearing and we'll open the discussion.
Motion to close the public hearing.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Moving on to the next point. Any comments or if anyone's prepared to make a motion or have additional questions, now's the time.
Mr. Chair, I've got a question or two here for the applicant.
Proceed.
So what I'm just curious is, and I went by the property and everything, the variance that you're requesting, of course, I get it, you're talking about storage space up above on a loft area. What I was wondering, though, is you mentioned storage of grain and hay and things like that, also for livestock, et cetera. Could you explain what the actual intent is there?
Sure. We would love to have chickens. We understand that that is an option, given the former owners had chickens. We don't plan to have cows, but we'd like to have storage for the chicken feed. So livestock might be a stretch when you consider, I probably could have just written chickens in the letter.
So, but I guess, again, I just wonder again, even if it's chickens, a barn that size with a loft that size, that's a lot of feed and hay and grain.
And storage, so if you went by the house, we don't have a whole lot of storage
I see the camper
currently.
on the north side of the lot out there and some other stuff there.
Yeah.
I mean, you definitely have a lot of space out there. I mean, you've got plenty of acreage out there. I guess the one thing that I'm trying to get through my mind is the actual, as you know, and it's probably been explained to you by the planning commission, is we have to have or prove or show a hardship or practical difficulty for these type of variances. Now, doesn't so much apply here, but just to give you an example, sometimes people have issues where they can't build something on this part of the lot because maybe there is a septic tank or a leach field, specific drainage, there's overhead wires that they can't get, by because of it's an easement from the power company, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things we look at, plus more. So I know that you put in here that the township ordinance was your hardship, but that's not truly a hardship. The ordinance is what it is. So if you can give me something in my mind to really think about what is a true hardship besides, what we're seeing so far.
Mainly I'm sorry, I'm Mike. I'm her husband, Mike Malak. Mainly we're putting hay above. My stepdad does hay. We have a lot of equipment that's being stored elsewhere, tractors, backhoes, and my father-in-law's place, my parents' place, and barns. That's all coming to our house when we build our barns. So the floor space is mostly taken up, so we're hoping to keep hay and any grain, because my brother does pigs and stuff, so just places for us to store all that grain and all that hay and all that stuff, because my stepdad does hay. So really, when we bring tractors and backhoes and all that stuff, we don't want all that on the floor, because we kind of want the floor space to use for all of our equipment. That's really the gist of it.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Question. With regarding to the grain and hay, is there advantages to having it up high as opposed to having it on the floor?
I believe so, yeah, just to keep critters out of it. That's really the gist of it, of keeping other animals from burrowing in and getting into all of it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't want you to be misled because you are in a R2B residential zoning district, and there are certain restrictions with respect to uses in an R2B district. Chickens is not one of the allowed uses in an R2B district, at least, and there's been a lot of discussion regarding ordinance amendments, but I think it's been the wishes of the Township Board, which is the legislative body of the board, which is the only body that can change or amend ordinances, zoning ordinances, that they're going to keep that the way it is. So I don't want you to be misled to thinking that you absolutely can have farm animals at your property or in your barn, because you may not be allowed to do that. Certainly, you would not be able to keep pigs, cows, livestock, things of that nature. Our ordinance would allow for you to keep horses with special use approval, and it's based on the number of acres, and I understand you have 30-plus acres, so you could actually board a fair number of horses there. That is an allowable use. So, and I also understand you have a large, what I'll call a large lot, but acreage there. But I just don't want you to leave here thinking, if the board approves your variance, that you can absolutely unequivocally have that, so.
And it wouldn't be, we had a conversation when we submitted the application that if the previous owners, because it was a little confusing, being taxed at, the assessed taxed at agricultural but zoned residential, that was a little confusing to understand. But then once I got through that, it was if the previous owners had chickens, because that would be our hope that we could, but obviously we'll follow whatever the guidelines are, then we could
Well,
grandfathered, that would be
yeah,
grandfathered.
what you're talking about is whether, if it was a prior legal non-conforming use. So that would depend upon several factors. One, when that use started and what the property was owned at that time, or if that use actually started before 1977, when the Bedford Township zoning ordinance was adopted. And then it would also depend on, was there any lapse in that use? From the time the previous owners sold to you, for instance, and the time, so there's been, there may have been a lapse in use such that the prior legal nonconforming status may have been abandoned. I'm not going to offer an opinion on that tonight because I don't know all the facts.
Okay.
And I just wanted to bring it up so that you wouldn't automatically think that you could do certain things. You have a unique parcel because it's so large in an R2B district. You have a unique parcel because, if I remember correctly, you abut the high-tension utility lines. So it's unique in many respects. And that could be part of the practical difficulty that we're discussing here this evening as well. So I guess that's all I have to say. I just like people to know what the ordinance is and how it may impact your use.
Thank you. Yeah, and Mr. Lake, I know you asked about the storage. I don't know if, having a dirt floor and having hay on a dirt floor versus, I would think it being elevated would be better for storing it elevated versus because of moisture. So that's another value of having elevated storage, which we wouldn't if we didn't have the variance. We do also understand that if we were to build a larger, so the way that the calculation works, to build a larger, I think it was
Larger floor area?
a larger foot area, and then it would be 10-foot sidewalls. It basically, I can show the example of what it would be versus what we're proposing. It's far more aesthetically pleasing what we're proposing versus this ginormous barn, if you'd like.
Just a question too on that. If you were to build a larger footprint with regards to a barn, I mean, is there does it get to a point at which the costs become unattainable to be able to fit all of your equipment in?
It will be very costly, meaning unattainable from a high expense perspective.
Correct.
To expand the barn, absolutely.
Well, because of the acreage they have, their floor area, it's unlimited.
Right, right.
So that's another factor to talk about or
But
think
even
about.
so, that doesn't help them with the height issue.
It doesn't help with they wouldn't be here. I mean, they could double the size of their proposed accessory structure, and they wouldn't need to be here if they kept within the 20 feet. So,
I'm just thinking in the realm of if you're building a home, if you're building a two-story home versus a ranch, you spend less in roofing and footings, et cetera.
To build, it would be 130, it'd have to be 130 feet wide to get to be the same height that we're looking for to have the loft storage. Incredibly expensive, I'm sure.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
you ever think of getting a smaller backhoe? I can understand your dilemma, but I'm struggling with the fact that it's zoned residential and there are height restrictions. Other than a redesign of the building to give you that, the height of the door, I don't know any other way around it. No?
Is there anyone that's ready to make a motion? You willing to hear one?
I don't know if it would help to see what we would be able to build basically the same height with no variance request, but a much larger barn on the property. I've made some copies. It's not of what it would look like, just so you could see the difference.
It's permissible. You guys want to take a look at the drawing?
I believe these are in your packet.
Oh, there.
Those are not.
Those are different?
The blue shaded in is what we're requesting, but then the outline is what it would be. It's not, again, it's not our desired. As you can see, it's very, it gives us the loft storage. But again, it's not what we're hoping to build, but that is within the 20-foot variance. So what we're trying to do is put something that meets our needs for the storage. And
So yeah, that's 130 feet from side to side.
right.
It's very large.
The equipment is not going to change, and so the fact that we need that door height regardless. And so if you think of, the hardship, that is a hardship. We do have the option to build larger, but we would still have the same height. We need that 14-foot door in order to get the backhoe in. That backhoe height is not going to change.
Any more discussion? Questions? Seeing none, is anyone prepared to make a motion?
I guess I have a question, being the new person. In terms of hardship, So just so that I'm clear going forward, is cost and that sort of thing, can that be considered part of the hardship as well?
Generally speaking, no.
Okay.
And hardship and practical difficulty, those terms are often used interchangeably. The law has changed over the years. It used to be hardship, but as the law has evolved on this subject, it's now principally called practical difficulty. The practical difficulty I see is that they have existing equipment. They need a certain door height, and in order to accommodate that certain door height and keep all of their equipment under roof and out of the elements and out of sight from neighbors, which would be more aesthetically pleasing, the practical difficulty is to store that equipment and to have that certain door height, they need a certain roof height, and that just happens to be 5 feet above what would otherwise be allowed. If we were in an ag district, this wouldn't be an issue, obviously. We're in an R2B district. The other side of the practical difficulty is that they have a parcel that's 30-plus acres and that it abuts high-tension utility lines, and that nobody's going to be on that side of them ever because of the high-tension utility lines. So that's the best I can do to help you out with the practical difficulty argument.
Is that a motion?
No, I can't, as you know, make those.
One of the other things, too, was hardships. They also cannot be self-created hardships. So that's something we have to look at.
And we did not create the backhoe.
Well, I mean, that's sort of gray. I mean, like Mr. Jenkins said, smaller backhoe.
Right.
But-
I can cite that there was an approval for an RV that received the township approved a few years back for a height variance.
That-
Yeah, but I'm saying
Yeah, I
that
mean-
landowner did not create the RV, and that was a nice convenience to have the RV stored inside.
Those have been granted in the past, yes.
Yeah.
It's just some more food for thought.
Well, again, since every case has to have its own merits, I mean, I get what you're saying. And again, we don't know the specifics of that property, whether it was residential, whether it was, something else. It's really hard to say without knowing all the facts of
Fair.
what property.
Yeah, that's fair. We're certainly no experts at presenting this information, and we appreciate
No, I
you
mean-
taking this into consideration. We want to, like I said, you see the print. We could have a much larger building where our goal is to store the equipment not in the front of a barn. Lewis Avenue, we've got pine trees that we've planted and made the property beautiful. We've restored the home as much as we could and take really good care of our property, and this is just another way of doing so versus having something that's, in my opinion, an eyesore, which is equipment sitting outside that we
Right.
own.
Well, I think you can tell this is not a slam dunk yes or a slam dunk no, and I think you can look at everybody here, everybody's really struggling. And one of the things that, if we do approve this, we also are setting a precedent in the township. So we also have to be very careful when we set a precedent. What's it going to drive? What's it going to bring after the fact? So every variance has a potential, but we have to just think about that while we're doing it if we do approve one.
Question for Mr. Steiner, actually. I heard that there was some talk by the Township Board of extending water up Lewis Avenue. Is that correct?
Right now, it was at the railroad tracks, and eventually there's talk about going further. A lot of that started after the church fire. But from the cost standpoint and with the current level of expansion in the township to the north, because when you build those systems, as you very well know, you have to loop those systems. You can't just go up and stop and tee it off, it has to be looped. Honestly, I don't see any expansion in our water distribution for quite some time to the north. But I mean, it's been approved to go that direction, but I don't see it in the real near future.
It's going north to the church, and the
Yeah,
church.
but I mean, that's not
That's
too
at
much.
Lewis and Erie.
Right.
This property is a significant distance to the north.
Right.
And it may eventually go that far, but probably not in the foreseeable
Well,
future.
probably not there because of looping it. They're probably going to go down Erie Road and they're not going to go up. Then other than that, they'd have to then go all the way to Samaria Road and loop it.
Yeah.
So.
Any other questions or discussion for the group? If not, I'd be willing to entertain a motion.
I'll, for the sake of discussion, I'll make a motion to approve the request for a 5-foot height variance to construct a 60 by 80 accessory building per section 14.1903 at 10232 Lewis Avenue, Temperance, Michigan.
Second for discussion.
Go ahead, Mr. Steiner.
So if we're going to vote on this as an affirmative, this is where we definitely have to consider any kind of conditions or things that are going to be placed on the variance approval. So, a couple recommendations. First off would be, and this would be to Mr. Jenkins because he'll have to approve my friendly amendment. The drainage off of the barn itself through the eaves troughs and gutters, they would have to tie in. And you said which system it's going to tie in, and it go to your pond or to the Lewis Avenue ditch?
It would go to the ditch. We would tie it into our pond overflow, the 6-inch pipe.
Okay, tie that in. And I won't make this an absolute requirement, but if there is any runoff from this building to be determined that it's affecting the neighbor's property with any additional flow, as Mr. Goldsmith stated, you can't divert and control flow per se, especially from another person's property, but maybe some berming on your property to keep it from going over into the neighbor's property. And I didn't hear a question, and again, this is not normal. I want to make sure if there's going to be consideration to say yes. Were you putting any kind of trees or any kind of landscaping out there? Okay. Because I know sometimes if you got a line of trees, that also sometimes. But again, I'll leave that part up to when I say berming, and if chosen, to add trees to that berming, because I know sometimes that will help. As for the high tension lines, that one, I can't put that one in there. I don't see what that would have to do with the height. I will mention, though, the height issue of a large backhoe. On the property that needs to be stored inside. Does that door need to be height needed for your camper as well?
No. For the camper?
Okay, so I'm gonna mention that, and the large backhoe, I'm just gonna put the RV storage. And all other types of recreational ATVs, et cetera, shall also be stored inside. Okay, that's my friendly amendment for now.
Accepted.
And the-
Who seconded
Who
the
seconded
motion?
I did,
Rick did.
Okay.
Okay.
and I'll, of course, I accept what I said.
We have a motion, we have a second. Karen, if you want to call the roll.
Mr. Jenkins?
Yes.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right. Moving on to the next order of business, any general public comment? If you'd like to come forth, let me do so now. Seeing that I think we're done with public comment, then we're going to move on to the next piece, which would be board and staff comments. Starting with Karen.
Just welcome aboard to the new members this evening. Other than that, I have nothing.
I have nothing for you tonight.
I'll say, welcome aboard to our new member, and to Dennis, you're back.
Back. Like a bad penny. Can you make these a little easier the next time?
I'll wait until the mics are off.
Karen specializes in difficult.
No,
Feels that way sometimes.
no, I don't have anything other than I appreciate the explanation on a few of these things that I'm new to, so thank you.
Nothing further tonight.
I have nothing either. Any motion to make adjournment here?
Make a motion? Okay.
All right, we'll take it then. Thank you.